She collapsed right there in the dirt, just past the fence gate. Not a sound, not a scream, just the soft thud of a body giving out. Jacob Lawton didn't see her fall. He heard the dog whimper first. Then the wind shifted. Something was off. He grabbed the lantern from the hook and stepped off the porch, boots crunching through the frostbitten grass. The night as quiet as snow but dry as bone. The flame flickered in the glass as he passed the gatepost. And there she was, face down in the dirt, skirt torn at the hem, one bare foot dragging behind her like it didn't belong. He knelt fast, young, maybe 20 if that, skin dark with dust, hair stuck to her cheeks, dried blood caked into the side of her temple. She was still breathing barely. He touched her shoulder. She flinched, eyes fluttered open, wild, white. Then her lips moved, just one word, but the fear in her voice turned the air cold. Run. Jacob looked up into the black. Nothing but stars and branches, but his gut knew better. He scooped her into his arms, her weight almost nothing, and moved fast toward the barn. The barn was warmer than the house. He laid her on the hay bed in the back stall, near the saddles and grain sacks, where no windows could be seen from the tree line. The dog Boone didn't bark, just circled once, then laid by the door, alert but quiet. Jacob wiped the dirt from her face with the edge of his sleeve. She was native or part, maybe, Apache by the look of her cheekbones. But her dress wasn't tribal, cotton, faded blue, too thin for the season. Her wrist bore an iron cuff, the hinge broken, the skin beneath it raw. Not a runaway slave, not this far west, something else. He poured water into a tin cup and touched it to her lips. She tried to lift her head, then fell back with a quiet groan. So he waited, let her breathe. The clock above the tack shelf ticked like a slow drum. Just past 9 p.m. He didn't know who she was, but she hadn't come out of nowhere, and she hadn't come alone. Jacob Lawton had lived alone for 7 years. He wasn't a recluse, just a man who stopped needing voices that didn't mean anything. Since the war, since the cattle business collapsed, since his brother died on a ridge no one bothered naming, he'd made his life simple. Tend the land, fix what breaks, speak only when necessary. Folks in town called him quiet, strange, but honest. He'd never picked a side in the old fights, but even silence is a choice when it goes on too long. He left the girl resting and stepped out into the cold again, shotgun in hand. Not to shoot, just to see. The prairie was open, and the night was thin. But the trees held breath. He could feel it. Movement not of wind, but of waiting. And then Boone growled, low, from the barn. Jacob turned, fast, eyes scanning the ridge near the rear fence. And there, one figure, standing still, not moving toward him, just watching, silhouetted against the moonlight. Then another, farther left, and another. By the time he counted 5, he stopped. There were more than that, 10, maybe more. Not charging, not shouting, just surrounding. He stepped backward toward the barn door, keeping his lantern high. Every step felt like it echoed. When he opened the door again, Boone was still by the girl. She was awake now, sitting up against a hay bale holding her ribs. She looked at him, and for the first time he saw her clearly. The fear in her was deep, but deeper still resolve. I didn't bring them, she whispered. Jacob lowered the lantern. I know. She looked down at her wrist. They'll come for me. Are they yours? She shook her head. No one's. He hesitated, then asked, Why'd you run? She met his eyes, and said simply, They killed a man who tried to buy me. Jacob said nothing. The barn creaked. The wind rose, and somewhere a horse snorted. Outside, the Apache stayed where they were, like ghosts. No war cries, no torches, just presence. Jacob didn't light the house lamps, didn't try to mount a defense. He just waited, and slowly the girl, who hadn't said her name, told her story, piece by piece. Sold from a mining town, smuggled through a trading post in New Mexico territory, passed from one filthy bed to another until a man tried to marry her near Santa Rosa. He paid, and they slit his throat. She ran. She'd run 3 nights before collapsing at his fence. I didn't know whose land it was, she said. I just kept walking toward light. Jacob listened, didn't interrupt, just handed her a coat and said, "You're here now." Midnight came. The dog didn't bark again, just let out a soft breath and laid flat against the stall door. Jacob peeked out once more. The figures were closer, now within bow range, still not moving. And then one stepped forward, out from the black. An elder, alone, no weapons in hand. He walked to the edge of the pasture, and stopped, didn't cross the fence, just stood, waiting. Jacob opened the barn door and stepped out. They faced each other across 50 paces of frostbitten grass. Then the man raised his hand, not in threat, but in peace, and called out, voice low but clear, "She is not yours." Jacob didn't move. "She carries no name from our bands." Still, Jacob said nothing. Then the elder added, "But the men she fled from wear our paint, and bring shame to the old ways." Jacob lowered the gun, took one step forward, and asked, "Then why surround my barn?" The man paused, then spoke the truth neither wanted to say aloud. "Because we feared what you might do." Jacob exhaled, looked back at the barn, at the girl wrapped in hay and flannel, her knees drawn to her chest like she was still bracing for a blow. Then he said, "I let her rest. That's all." A silence. Then the elder nodded once, softly, and turned. No signal. But one by one, the shadows peeled away from the night, vanishing into the black, like ghosts come only to witness and judge. Jacob stood there long after they were gone, still as stone. Then slowly he turned back to the barn. Boone still hadn't moved, and the girl, now finally asleep, breathed deeper than she had in days. As the wind picked up, the last of the footprints outside faded into the dust. But the feeling stayed, that something sacred had crossed his land, and chose, for one night, to leave it untouched. By morning, nothing remained but hoofprints in the frost. Jacob stood at the fence line, steam rising from his coffee cup, watching the sun peel slow over the prairie. The night had passed without fire, without blood, without even a word after that final nod. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Not with the land. With him. He'd always lived by a simple code. Don't invite trouble, don't run from it either. Stay quiet, stay honest, and let the world tear itself up beyond the hills. But now he'd brought someone into his barn, fed her, defended her, and the world beyond the hills had noticed. Inside, the girl was awake. She was sitting cross-legged on the hay, cradling the tin cup in both hands like it was something precious. The cut on her temple had stopped bleeding. The bruises around her throat were turning from deep purple to that ugly shade of yellow. Jacob walked in quietly, boots crunching over hay. She didn't flinch this time, just looked up at him, wary, but not wild. He crouched and handed her a slice of bread and a piece of dried meat. "You sleep." She nodded. He waited, then asked gently, "What's your name?" She hesitated, then said, "Sela." He repeated it quietly. Sela. The name felt soft on his tongue. Patchy for sure. But it had something else in it. Something older, almost biblical. She didn't offer more and he didn't push. Instead, he sat beside her and tore off a piece of bread. After a long pause, she whispered, "You don't ask many questions." Jacob shrugged. "Most folks lie when they're scared. I'd rather wait till they're ready." She stared at the steam rising from the cup. "They'll come again. Those men." She nodded slowly. "They sell girls to the miners and to the camps. Call themselves Apache, but they're not. Not really." "You mean they're using Apache names to scare folks?" She nodded again. "They say the blood makes them strong. But they forgot the old ways. They forgot shame." Jacob leaned back against the stall wall and let her words sit. Then asked, "And your people?" The ones who came last night. She looked at him. Long. Quiet. They weren't there to take me, she said softly. They came to see what you would do. He nodded. I figured. Most men trade girls like coins. Jacob didn't answer. Didn't need to. Sela's eyes softened. Just slightly. And for the first time since she'd collapsed at his gate, her voice steadied. They'll try to take me back. I won't let em. You don't even know me. He looked her in the eye. No. But I know what a hunted person looks like. Sela held his gaze. And for a moment, neither of them were in the barn. They were both somewhere else. Somewhere darker. Running from something they didn't speak of. Later that day, Jacob saddled up his horse and rode into town. He left Sela with Boone, who didn't let anyone pass the front gate unless Jacob gave the say-so. Riding down into Sand Creek felt different now. He could feel the eyes. Half the folks already heard about the girl, about the riders, about the tracks that circled his land like a storm cloud. And like always, the stories were worse than the truth. They always were. At the general store, he picked up flour, salt, a bolt of fabric, and a small tin of salve for Sela's wounds. Old Martha at the counter squinted at him as she wrapped the goods. You took in that girl? She asked plainly. Jacob met her eyes. Yes. She Apache? She's hurt. Martha paused, then went back to wrapping. I don't care what blood she carries, she muttered, long as she doesn't bring fire to your roof. Jacob said nothing, but the quiet between them said plenty. Outside, as he strapped the supplies to his saddle, two men leaned against a wagon near the livery. One of them spit. You start harborin' their kind, pretty soon they start claimin' your land. Jacob paused, turned slowly, met their eyes. I didn't ask for your opinion. The taller one smirked. You'll get more than opinion if they come again. Jacob walked up close, so close the man had to shift his boot. I don't care if they come or not, he said softly. But if you come to my gate uninvited. He let the words hang, and for once silence worked in his favor. The men backed down. He mounted up, rode off without another glance. When he got back, Boone was sitting calmly by the porch. Sela was inside, sitting at the small table, flipping slowly through an old copy of Psalms Jacob kept near the lamp. She looked up when he came in. He handed her the salve. She took it, careful not to brush his hand. Town's talkin', he said simply. I figured. He sat down across from her, elbows on the table. They might come after you. Sela didn't blink. Then let them come. Jacob studied her. No bravado in her voice. No tremble either. Just calm. And maybe that scared him more than anything. She had nothing left to lose. And women with nothing left to lose don't cry out. They end things. Quietly. That night, Jacob sat by the fire sharpening a knife he hadn't used in years. Boone curled by the door. Sela lay on the bedroll near the stove, eyes closed but not sleeping. The wind scraped against the shutters. Jacob looked over. You ever want to go back? She opened her eyes. To where? To the ones who stood outside the barn. Sela turned her head away. I don't belong anywhere anymore. He let that sit, then said, maybe that's not true. Sela didn't answer, but she didn't close her eyes either. And long after the fire burned down to coals, Jacob stayed in the chair, watching the dark outside, knowing it wouldn't be long before men came not for justice, but for ownership. And when they did, they wouldn't care about Apache law, or the girl's bruises, or what the silence last night had meant. They'd care about property. And the girl on his floor? They'd claim she was theirs. But Jacob had already made his decision. They came just after sundown. 3 riders, no torches, no warning. Not Apaches. White men. Too clean, too smug. Tied down coats and stiff posture like men used to holding ledgers. Not reins. They didn't ride fast, they didn't have to. The kind of confidence that only comes from believing the law bends when you press hard enough. Jacob saw the dust trail before he saw their hats. Watched them through the slats of the barn window as they moved like a sermon headed straight for hell. Steady, righteous, and cold. Boone stood up before they even reached the gate, a low growl rolling in his throat. Seela didn't speak. She was sitting on the barn floor, sewing the edge of a blanket with the new thread Jacob had brought. Her fingers stilled, needle hanging mid-air. "Is it them?" she asked softly. Jacob nodded once, then handed her the cloth-wrapped pistol from the cabinet above the feed sacks. "I don't aim for you to use it," he said. "Just hold it." She stared at the gun, swallowed hard, then wrapped her hand around it and nodded. Outside, the hooves slowed, then stopped. The leader dismounted, boots crunching dry dirt, the kind that hadn't seen rain in months. Jacob stepped out slow, coat open, hands empty. Shotgun leaned by the barn door but within arm's reach. The man was in his 40s, pale mustache waxed sharp. He tipped his hat with mock politeness. "Evenin', Mr. Lawton." Jacob didn't answer. The man gestured to the barn. "We heard you had something of ours." Jacob's jaw tightened. "Don't own much that isn't nailed down. And nothing human." The second rider, younger, with sunburned cheeks and a too-tight belt, smirked. "She's not yours either." "No," Jacob said. "She's her own." The lead man's smile faded. "We've got papers. From the company. She was purchased for companionship in Silver Mesa." Jacob didn't blink. "She's not there anymore. She ran from a contract. She ran from a cage." The third man, who hadn't spoken yet, dismounted and pulled a folded piece of paper from his coat, held it up like a sheriff serving a warrant. "You can read this. Says she's property until her term expires. Says she's required to return." Jacob stepped closer, eyes scanning the fake seal, the forged signature. He let the man hold it out a moment longer, then said, "That paper means nothing here." The lead man narrowed his eyes. "Be careful, rancher." "I am." The three men shifted. Jacob could see it in their posture. They weren't used to being told no, weren't used to being seen as wrong, and they weren't going to leave without a show. The youngest moved first, stepped toward the barn door. Boone barked, loud and sharp, standing his ground. Jacob's hand dropped to the shotgun. "Back up," he said, calm, but final. The leader raised his hand to stop the young one, then looked at Jacob with a different tone. "No pretense now. You want her for yourself? Is that what this is?" Jacob didn't answer, didn't rise to it. He just stared, flat, still. "She's damaged goods," the man continued. "Not worth the trouble. And you're not a young man anymore." Jacob tilted his head, just slightly. "Trouble's still better company than cowards." The insult landed, hard. But before the man could react, before his mouth could even shape the threat, a new sound rolled across the field. Hooves, dozens. Not fast, not charging, just steady, like a drumbeat from the trees. The three men turned. From the tree line, shadowed by dusk, they began to emerge, one by one, on horseback, feathers, paint, long braids catching wind. No weapons raised, no war cries, just presence. Again, silent, watching, but this time not surrounding the ranch, just standing. Behind Jacob, dozens of them, maybe more. Seela stepped out of the barn behind him, the pistol wrapped in the cloth, held tight against her side. She didn't need to say anything. The men saw her bruises, her eyes, the quiet steadiness of her legs even though she trembled. And they saw the riders. The lead man swallowed. "This isn't your business," he tried. Jacob spoke low. "It became theirs the night you started dressing your sins in their colors." The youngest reached for his belt. Boone growled. The third man placed a hand on his partner's wrist, stopped him, then turned to the leader. "Let it go, Henry." Silence. Then grudgingly a nod. They turned, mounted, didn't speak again, just rode off, slow but shaking. The dust followed them, bitter and fast, until it was gone. And then the prairie was still. Jacob turned, faced the line of Apache riders. The same elder from that night was there, mounted on a pale horse with a scarred flank. He raised his hand once. Jacob mirrored it. Then the riders turned and left, as silent as they'd come. Seela let out a breath that trembled. Her knees gave a little, Jacob caught her before she hit the ground. "It's over," she whispered. "No," he said softly. "But it changed." She nodded, leaned her head against his shoulder, and for the first time since collapsing at his gate, she let herself cry. Not from fear, not from pain, but because she didn't have to run anymore. Not from men, not from ghosts, and not from her name. The fire had long since burned down to coals, but Sela sat awake on the floor, her back pressed to the warm clay stove. Her fingers ran slowly over the blanket in her lap. Not nervously, not idly, just remembering. Jacob watched her from his chair by the table, boots off, sleeves rolled, a mug of cooled coffee forgotten beside him. He didn't speak, didn't want to break whatever she was thinking through. Boone was the only one who moved, shifting quietly between them, his tail thumping once against the wooden planks. Finally, she looked up. "You know why they came back that second night?" Jacob raised his eyes. "You said they came to see what I'd do." Sela nodded. "Yes, that first night. But the second?" Her voice softened. "They came to see if I'd stay." Jacob leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You weren't planning to, were you?" She shook her head. "I was going to leave after sunrise. Didn't want to bring anyone else down. But you didn't. I saw the look on your face, the way you stepped in front of the barn before they even asked. You didn't even know me." She paused. "I haven't seen a man do that since my father." Jacob looked down, let the silence breathe between them. "What happened to him?" She looked away, toward the shuttered window. The prairie wind rustled the edge of the roof outside, like it always did when the moon rose just past the ridge. "They called him a traitor. Said he turned soft, living near white towns. Said he was teaching shame." She smiled, barely. "But he was just teaching me how to stay human." A long breath. "He was knifed outside a general store. In daylight. No one was punished." She blinked slowly, but no tears came. Just memory. Jacob's throat tightened, but he said nothing. He didn't need to. They started working the land together after that. Not in any official way. She'd carry buckets. He'd patch the roof. She learned how to brace a saddle. He learned the old words for corn, for crow, for rain. They didn't talk much while they worked, but the silence was never heavy. It was earned. One morning, she asked if she could paint the inside of the barn. Something simple, maybe a border of symbols she remembered from her childhood. He said yes without hesitation. The next day, a thin red line traced the bottom beam, curling into shapes that looked like rivers, fire, roots. When Jacob asked what it meant, she said, "It means this place remembers, even if no one else does." One night, a storm rolled in from the west, full of lightning but no rain. Sela couldn't sleep. She stepped outside barefoot, walked into the field and tilted her face to the sky. Jacob followed, standing a few feet behind her in the doorway. "You ever scared of the dark?" she asked without turning. "Sometimes," he said. "Me too." Lightning flashed, a pale streak across the black. "I used to think if I stood still enough it couldn't find me," she said. "But it always does," he answered. She turned, slowly. Her hair, long now and brushed, framed her face softer than he remembered. "You stood still that night," she whispered. "And it did find you." He nodded. "But I wasn't afraid of it." "You should have been." He stepped closer. "I've lived with worse." She searched his face, then stepped even closer. "Will you keep standing?" He met her eyes. "Steady. For as long as it takes." The next day, Jacob rode into town with a basket. He left it with Martha at the general store, filled with bread Sela had baked, herbs she'd gathered from the ridge, and a folded note in her handwriting. The note said, "The girl who collapsed isn't gone. She just got back up." He didn't wait to see who read it. Didn't care if they whispered or warned or turned their faces away. The ranch was no longer just a boundary of land and boards. It was witness, and it was hers now too. Weeks passed. Seasons shifted. Sela taught Jacob how to braid cedar with tobacco and tie it above the barn door when the wind carried bad dreams. He taught her how to read cattle eyes and mend a fence line before it snapped clean in wind. One morning, she rode out alone to gather wild mint by the streambed, and found something waiting, not a threat, a gift, a woven circle of feathers, cedar, and red ribbon, the kind used in ceremonies of healing. No note, no name, but she knew who it came from, and what it meant. You've been seen. You've been forgiven. You belong again. That night, she told Jacob she wanted to stay, not just till the world cooled down, not until the men forgot. Permanently, she stood at the doorway of the barn, her voice low and steady. I want to build something that outlives me, not just survive. Jacob stepped beside her. Then start here. He reached up and tied the circle of feathers above the barn door. The breeze caught it, and for the first time, Selah smiled like someone whose name had finally come back home. Years passed like wind over wheat, slow, soft, and steady, until one day you look up and everything's taller, quieter, older. The ranch held on. So did Jacob. And Selah? She grew, not just in strength or voice, or the way she walked through town without flinching, but in how she taught others to stay. At first, it was just a few girls. Ones with bruises they didn't explain, ones with eyes that didn't blink when men raised their voices. Then came a mother with a child on her hip. Then a boy who spoke 3 languages and trusted none of them. The barn became more than shelter. It became a safe place. No sign out front. No name. But the right people always found it. Because it stood where silence had once been honored, and where a woman had once collapsed, not knowing she'd rise taller than the hills behind her. Jacob aged like stone, slowly and in place. He didn't speak more than he had to, but when he did, people listened. When someone asked if the stories about the night of the riders were true, he'd just say, they came, they looked, they left. And if pressed, he'd add, not all judgments spoken aloud. Some just watch and wait for you to choose. Selah kept the painting on the barn's inner beam. She added to it more curves, a few colors, one small figure with arms raised, surrounded by horses, and one standing beside her, taller, holding no weapon, just open hands. Who's that one? A child once asked. Selah looked at the figure, then at Jacob sitting on a stump nearby. That's the man who didn't look away, she said. When Jacob passed, in his sleep at the age of 78, the barn was full. Not of mourners, not of eulogies, just people who owed him safety. A circle of women and boys and a few men who had once been lost, and now had roots. They didn't cry loud. They just stood and remembered. Selah stood at the front, her fingers wrapped around the old feather ring that had hung above the barn door since that second night. She tied it to the fence post that morning. Let the wind carry it in place of words. No preacher, just presence. And as the wind moved through the long grass, someone began to hum. A sound without language, rising from the old tongue, the kind carried in bone more than breath. Later, a rider came from the ridge. Not alone. 3 others followed, young, stern, watchful. The elder from years ago was gone. But this one rode with the same calm. He didn't speak right away, just dismounted, approached the fence, then handed Selah a carving, a bridge, 2 figures, and a sun between them. Selah traced it with her thumb. It's yours now, he said. Why now? She asked softly. He glanced at the barn, then back at her. Because the watching is over. He paused. You didn't just survive. You stayed. And you made others stay too. Then he mounted again. And left. No flare. No war cry. No threat. Just acknowledgement. And peace. The ranch never turned into a town. That wasn't its purpose. But travelers knew of it. They called it different things, the woman's place, the quiet fence, the painted barn. But those who needed it, they called it what it really was. A place where you're not judged by who wants to own you, only by who you choose to become. Years later, children ran in the fields where Selah once fell. They fed chickens, learned how to plow, read poetry in 3 tongues, and tied knots that would hold through any storm. And each night, when the sun dipped behind the cottonwoods, One of them would point to the carving above the stall and ask, "Who are they?" And someone, maybe a teacher, maybe a guest, maybe Sela herself, would say, "That one there? That's the girl who fell. And that one next to her? That's the man who stayed." And though the world changed, the wind never forgot that night, that moment when rage stayed its hand, when shadows chose silence, when a barn became a church without crosses, and when one girl, broken at the gate, looked up and realized, not all men came to take. Some came to see, and some stayed to build.